بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وأفضل الصلوات والتسليمات على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So I kind of find it funny that in this day and age we're sitting in a small room but we still need to use mics and pass them around. I think I would suggest that when we start the discussion that we just use our voices in general. I mean, we got to learn how to talk. The Prophet ﷺ prayed in the masjid around this size, and women used to come, the men used to come, they didn't have mics. But I guess that's a tangential point. I really want to get to the discussion, so I just want to mention a couple of points, inshallah. The first is that when we thought about this program, I was kind of hesitant to label it something as controversial as the psychology of extremism. I didn't want this to come off as a reaction. But as Brother Umar, he so eloquently put it, it is timely and it is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ to address issues according to the situation and as they come about. And the first point that I really wanted to make was just that, as Shaykh Oman mentioned, that this is a human problem, not a religious problem. Extremism, radicalism is a natural human tendency. It's existed as long as man has existed. It existed in the children of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, and it's continued to this day. And it manifests itself in different forms and attaches itself to different concepts and ideologies. And we see that the Prophet ﷺ didn't shy away from informing the ummah that it will manifest itself in amongst yourselves. And he described the tendencies or the manifestations of what we call sometimes in Arabic al-Ulum, which is extremism, right? And it's fascinating. I wanted to go through a certain hadith. The Prophet ﷺ had prophesied the emergence of certain groups, and he described them in a great amount of detail. And he also in a hadith mentioned that this would continue generation after generation until the end of time, until the Dajjal emerges. So he's like kind of the peak of that extremism. So we haven't seen anything yet, unfortunately, and that's kind of sad to say, but this would continue, and this is kind of a cyclical thing, the emergence of radicals in the world. So that's my first point. The first point is that this is nothing new, and there's a tendency within our community to go to an extreme in dealing with extremism. And that is that you either take the perspective, as I think Brother Human or Omar mentioned, that we either think it's all a conspiracy, as if conspiracies never existed before the last 100 years, and they didn't exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and there were no conspirators at that time, or it's all the fault of Muslims, and we blame completely the Muslims, and the Muslims are at fault in some problem with Islam. And this is actually another manifestation of extremism. And there's an extremism that is articulated in the form of violence, and there's an extremism that's articulated in the form of the corruption of religion and the confusion of one's faith and what are the boundaries of truth and falsehood, and that's something else that's discussed in the issue of ghulu. So that was the kind of the first issue. This is nothing new. We've dealt with it. The Prophet ﷺ dealt with it. He always checked that tendency to become extreme. The second issue, or the second point, is that the Prophet ﷺ did explain to us what the signs are of extremism within our community. And some of those points, inshallah, if I get an opportunity, I'll mention them. And the third point, which I'm not going to talk about yet, also I'll try to defer that to the end, is that there are very concrete and easy solutions. I love when people talk about radicalism in a khutbah and they don't give a solution at the end. Is that, okay, we acknowledge the problem, end of story, let's move on. I mean, okay, what's the solution? And the solutions are very simple. The solutions are very simple. The Prophet ﷺ explained to us the solutions, and we've seen that in every era there was an effort to combat that. We have different labels we use. In one era, we call it terrorism, radicalism, extremism. In Arabic we call it ghulu, tatarruf, ta'annut, right? And then in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was the khuruj, and then the khawarij, it was i'tizal and the mu'tazila. So there were different forms and manifestations of it, and the solutions were going to be one and the same. And history repeats itself, and we're going to learn those inshallah ta'ala as inshallah we continue the discussion. But I just kind of want to lay out these points because I don't want people to think that, oh, you know what, this is like, we're being forced to discuss this. This is something that's always discussed. And I remember someone argued with me on this issue that, all these scholars should be in the news and on NPR, and in the media bullies you into getting giving them some sort of statement, and why aren't they doing it? And I said, there is a need for that, but there's also a need to kind of just calm down, relax, and not sensationalize. Just like they're doing with Ebola, they're talking a lot about sensationalization, right? But they're talking about it when it comes to like terrorism as much, perhaps. Maybe they are, but we tend to sensationalize. If you play into that narrative, you're also not doing justice or service to the Muslim community, right? And every single khutbah last Friday, or the Friday before that, was on the same topic. It kind of feels like, some people feel like, you know what, we're all like sellouts, which we're not, inshallah, right? But we need to recognize that you don't always have to be pressured into discussing something, because we've been discussing this. The funny thing in the madrasas in Pakistan, when they always start blaming these madrasas for being the source of terrorism, someone issued a challenge. The head of the Wifaq, the union of madrasas there in Pakistan, he said, I issue a challenge to identify where terrorism is taught in our madrasas, an open door policy, and identify a terrorist. What we've been teaching and what we teach is exactly the antithesis of what you're talking about, and prove it otherwise. And that's a long discussion, but it's kind of it's irritating to me that every day in class I talk about these types of issues. Our teachers taught us about how to avoid extremism in your personality, extremism in the issues of fiqh, extremism in your social interactions, extremism in, and then people are like, oh, you guys don't talk about extremism. It's like, what are you talking about, right? That's what we talk about almost every single day. Our teachers spent years on us to train us to become moderate people. So obviously we don't want to give in to that and say that, yeah, you're right, we need to talk about it more, right? But at the same time, we do want to discuss it, especially in these circles, and very openly. And I hope people won't feel hesitant to ask very explicit questions, because these are things that our mashayikh never shied away from, and they always addressed, and they were very particular about it in our community. And the problem lies in the failure to ask those questions, inshallah. So Khalil Center is about discussion, community. Khalil comes from the idea of khulla, right? Being friendly. So if you guys don't feel comfortable asking a question, that we're obviously not doing our job. So inshallah ta'ala, with that, I'll close and just open the floor for comments and questions, inshallah.